Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know how sometimes you think you know a story and then bam, something comes along and like totally changes your perspective.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, that's what we're doing today, a total deep dive into the book of Job. But not just like the surface level stuff. We're going deep.
Deeper than deep.
Right. We're talking about a sermon from March 17th of last year that takes us behind the scenes of Job's story. And honestly, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
What this sermon reveals about suffering faith and even God himself is, seriously, it's a lot.
You know, most people think they know Job's story, but this sermon, it really digs into those early chapters, Job 1.6 through 2.90.
Yeah.
And there's a depth there that I think a lot of folks miss.
Totally. And right off the bat, we're thrown into this heavenly council scene. It's like angels and God and even Satan are just hanging out having a chat.
Yeah. Not your typical Sunday school image, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's like getting this behind the curtain peek at the spiritual world and how it all kind of works.
And it sets the stage for a much more complex understanding of how that spiritual world interacts with our lives.
So let's break this down. The sermon starts by introducing Job as this like perfect guy, righteous, wealthy, big, happy family. He's got it all.
The whole 9 yards.
Right. And that whole image of perfection, I think it's something we all struggle with in some way. Trying to look like we have it all together, even when life is falling apart.
Absolutely. It's like this constant pressure to project an image of success and happiness, even when we're hurting inside.
Exactly. So back to Job. What do you make of God kind of like boasting about Job to Satan in this opening scene? It's a little strange, isn't it?
It's definitely an interesting dynamic. On one hand, it feels like a parent proudly showing off their kid. But then there's this other layer, like, is Job being set up for something? Is this all just some kind of cosmic test?
And that whole wager thing between God and Satan, honestly, it makes me a little uncomfortable. Like, is Job just a pawn in their game?
I think that's a question that's bothered people for centuries. But the sermon really tries to emphasize that this isn't about God being manipulative or cruel. It's about revealing something much deeper about faith, about what it means to truly trust God.
Okay, so the sermon also talks about Job's family life.
Yeah.
You know, his kids and how they'd have these big feasts together. It actually compares that to modern affluenza.
Yeah.
The whole idea that wealth doesn't actually equal happiness.
Right.
What do you think about that comparison? Does it hold up? I mean, we're bombarded with messages about material success all the time these days.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the sermon is trying to get at this timeless human struggle to find contentment, no matter what our circumstances are. You know, even though Job's story is ancient, it still speaks to those anxieties we have today about keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, totally. And it goes beyond just material wealth, too.
Right.
The sermon points out that Job wasn't just a provider for his family. He was like a father priest, leading them in prayer, teaching them about God, taking a really hands-on approach to their spiritual development. It's pretty different from how a lot of fathers approach faith today.
It is. It's a really important point. You see, in ancient Israel, fathers often held these significant religious responsibilities within the family. So the sermon is kind of critiquing this modern trend of fathers delegating that spiritual development to institutions like churches or schools.
Yeah, so we're outsourcing spirituality in a way.
In a way, yeah. It raises the question, you know, is there something valuable in that more active paternal spiritual role? What could that even look like in today's world?
Definitely something to think about. Okay,
Yeah.
So now we get to the really interesting part, the heavenly council scene. I mean, who knew we were going to get a behind-the-scenes look at God's inner circle? Not exactly what you picture when you think Sunday school is.
No, not quite. And it's in this scene that we meet these sons of God, which, as the sermon explains, are actually angels forming this divine council. And then there's this other character, Satan, who isn't quite the devil we imagine from pop culture.
Right.
He's more like the adversary, an official of the heavenly court.
Okay, that definitely changes things up a bit. It's almost like Satan has this like VIP access to God. It's kind of unsettling if you really think about it.
It's thought-provoking, for sure. And it raises questions about how the spiritual realm operates. So the sermon presents these 3 potential models for understanding this.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So there's polytheism, which is the idea of multiple gods. Then you have absolute monism.
Monism.
Yeah, it's the idea that ultimately everything, even evil, is part of God's being. Kind of a mind-bending concept.
Yeah.
A little bit. But then there's this middle ground, this third model that suggests that God uses both good and evil supernatural agencies to carry out his will.
So even evil forces have a role to play in God's plan.
That's the suggestion, yeah. That doesn't mean that God is evil, but that he might use it. Kind of like how a chess player uses all the pieces on the board, even the pawns, to achieve a larger strategy.
That's complicated.
It is. And this third model doesn't diminish God's sovereignty, but it definitely complicates how we understand the way he works. It raises questions about free will, about why God allows suffering. And the sermon really stresses the importance of understanding the characters of God, Satan and Job, to grasp the depth of this story.
Okay, but this idea of God using evil agencies, doesn't that make him seem kind of manipulative?
It's a valid concern. And it's precisely why the book of Job is so challenging. It doesn't shy away from these tough questions.
And God's character in this story,
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting, right? He's portrayed as both sovereign and open to challenge. It's kind of paradoxical.
Absolutely. It points to a much more complex and nuanced view of God than we often see.
It definitely makes you think about how much we don't know. Right. So we've got this setup, this counsel, this wager, and then things take kind of a dark turn. God gives Satan permission to test Job.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really tough.
Yeah.
Where's the line? How much suffering is too much? It makes you question God's role in all of this.
Absolutely. Like,
Right?
is Job just a means to an end here?
That's a tough question. And I think the sermon emphasizes that it's not about God being cruel or setting Job up for failure. It's about revealing the nature of true faith, both Job's faith and our faith as readers.
So it's more about proving something than punishing Job.
Right. It's easy to be faithful when life is good, but what happens when everything is stripped away? Can faith endure through unimaginable loss and pain? That's what God wants to see, and I think it's something we all wrestle with.
It's a heavy question. And honestly, it makes me think about my own life. How would I react if I lost everything?
Yeah.
You know, have you ever felt like you were being tested? Where do you find strength when things get rough?
It's something we all have to grapple with at some point, I think, and that's the power of Job's story. It forces us to confront the limits of our own faith and to ask ourselves what really matters when things fall apart.
Yeah, you start to see what your foundation is made of.
Right.
So getting back to the story, Satan makes this bet with God that Job will curse him if you take away all the good stuff. It's almost like he's saying Job is only worshiping God because of the blessings he receives.
Exactly. He's questioning the sincerity of Job's faith. The idea is that if you take away the prosperity, the protection, Job's faith will crumble.
And the crazy part is God actually allows Satan to test this theory.
He does. He sets boundaries. Of course, Satan can't harm Job physically, but everything else is fair game.
Okay, so walk us through it. What does Job actually lose?
Well, it starts with his wealth. Everything he owns, his livestock, his servants, his entire fortune, it's all gone in an instant.
Just the thought of getting that news, one blow after another, it's devastating.
Absolutely. But then it gets even worse. Job gets word that all of his children have died all at once in a freak accident.
Oh my gosh, that's just horrific. I can't even imagine.
Unimaginable to lose everything that truly matters to you.
So how does Job react? Does he finally break?
That's the incredible thing. Even in this moment of absolute despair, Job doesn't curse God. He tears his clothes, shaves his head, and then he falls to the ground and worships.
He worships God after all of that.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
It's a truly powerful image of faith. It speaks to a depth of relationship with God that transcends circumstances.
It makes you wonder what kind of relationship they had, right? To experience that level of loss and still hold on to belief, what was it built on?
It's a relationship rooted in something much deeper than blessings or possessions. It's about understanding God's character and trusting his goodness, even when things are painful and don't make sense.
Wow. So if Job hasn't cursed God, does that mean the test is over?
Not exactly. The sermon makes it clear that this is just the first stage. Satan isn't convinced. He argues that Job's faith is still intact because he hasn't experienced true physical suffering. He hasn't been touched in his own flesh.
Wait, so now God allows Satan to inflict pain on Job. This is getting intense.
He does. But again, God sets limits. Satan can afflict Job with disease and pain, but he can't take his life.
I mean, it's something, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's still hard to wrap your head around. How can a loving God allow that?
It's a question that's haunted people for a long time, and the book of Job doesn't give us any easy answers.
So what happens to Job? What does he go through?
He's struck with these painful sores that cover his whole body. It's described as a debilitating condition, just agonizing. And even his wife, who has also lost everything, tells him to curse God and die, but Job refuses.
He still doesn't curse God, even after all of this.
He doesn't. He maintains his faith even when his body is racked with pain.
That's incredible. What strength.
It's It's powerful. And his response, it really gets you thinking. He says, shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil?
So he's acknowledging that life has both good and bad, and he's accepting it all as coming from God.
Exactly. And that acceptance, that unwavering trust, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, that's what makes Job's story so profound.
This is heavy stuff.
It is. But the sermon, it doesn't leave us in despair. It offers a glimpse of hope. It points to a deeper understanding of God's love and grace that comes out of the ashes of suffering.
Yeah, it really does make you think. So we've seen Job lose literally everything, his wealth, his children, his health, and yet he still hasn't cursed God. It's superhuman faith, right? Makes you wonder, what's the point? Is it all just some cosmic test?
Right, and that's where the sermon gets really interesting because it pushes us to move beyond the simple idea of suffering and reward. Like, you know how some folks think if you're good, only good things happen? Well, Job's story just blows their whole idea out of the water. It shows that even the most righteous people suffer.
So it's not a simple equation like
Yeah.
be good, get blessed, be bad, get punished.
Exactly. It dismantles that whole transactional view of faith.
Okay, but then why? Why would God allow this kind of suffering, especially to someone he clearly loves?
That's the big question, right? And the sermon doesn't try to give us all the answers, but it does offer some insights.
Yeah.
It suggests that Job's suffering, while it's deeply personal, is also part of this much bigger picture.
Yeah.
This cosmic battle between good and evil.
So that heavenly council scene with God and Satan making that wager about Job, it's all connected.
Right. The sermon argues that Job's suffering is part of this grand narrative. It's about God demonstrating his power and sovereignty over evil.
Okay, so Job's suffering, it's kind of like a test of his faith.
Yeah.
And a display of God's power.
Yeah, you could say that. But we have to remember that God isn't toying with Job. The sermon really emphasizes God's care for Job and that he's ultimately working to redeem his suffering.
Redeem his suffering. That's interesting.
Yeah, it suggests that even in the midst of our pain, there's a purpose, a possibility for growth, for transformation.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us? Like, what can we as listeners who might be struggling, what can we take away from this?
That's a great question. And that's really what the sermon leaves us with. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, God is there. He sees us, he understands, and he's working to bring good out of it. Job's story isn't about getting a simple answer to question, why do we suffer?
Right.
It's about learning to trust God, his goodness, his plan, even when we don't understand.
It's comforting, but also hard to fully grasp sometimes.
It is. And the sermon challenges us to go deeper in our own faith, to wrestle with those tough questions, to seek understanding, and to find solace in knowing that God is with us no matter what.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like we've uncovered so much about Job, about suffering, about faith.
Me too. It's a story that still speaks to us today, challenging us to think about the hard stuff.
So listeners, what stood out to you? What resonated with your own experiences? We'd love to hear your thoughts. As we wrap up, we want to leave you with this. It's one thing to listen to Job's story, but can we really trust God when our own world is falling apart? That's the challenge. So keep exploring. Keep diving deep into the book of Job and maybe other parts of the Bible that deal with these big questions. Until next time.
Now that we have unpacked Book of Job a bit, we encourage you to reflect on how these truths can be applied to your life this week. For ongoing encouragement, follow Grace Gospel Church on social media GGEFDE on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and more. Subscribe for more deep dive conversations each week as we explore the messages from Grace Gospel Church. For more resources to grow in faith, visit www.gracegospel.church. We pray for your continued growth in faith.